Today on Landline, from one failed nut venture to new opportunities, growing Australia's appetite for pistachios.
China is a particularly good market for pistachios generally and for Australian nuts these days. India is also showing a lot of prospects, but Europe is a big consumer of pistachios and we would expect to be accepted quite well there.
A unique approach to tackling mental health challenges among dairy farmers.
The first calendar we did was pretty raw. All the stories were pretty intense and probably most of them had the word suicide in them.
And the farmers helping bring a fussy little bird back from the brink of extinction.
Naturally, we want to be part of something that helps an endangered animal, but also we want to be able to manage our landscape, to have a healthy landscape, to run a good business.
Hello, I'm Pip Courtney. Australia's hazelnut harvest is underway. Still a boutique industry, last year it was set for dramatic growth. But as Landline's Sean Murphy reports, one of the world's largest confectionery companies has dropped its plans to develop a global hazelnut supply from down under.
At 4J's hazelnut farm near Orange in New South Wales, they're preparing the ground for the coming harvest. Within weeks, these trees will each drop up to 4 kilograms of nuts.
It's looking very promising indeed, Sean. There's plenty of nuts on the trees and they're very well filled.
And what are your expectations for the harvest?
Well, last year we got 15 tonnes. I think we could get 20 this year.
Basil and Jean Baldwin are pioneer hazelnut farmers in Australia. Their 10-hectare orchard is typically small in an industry where many of its 70 producers run family enterprises with fewer than 6,000 trees. But this time last year, the hazelnut industry was on track to grow dramatically. The world's 4th largest confectionery company, the Ferrero Group, was preparing to harvest the oldest of almost 1 million trees planted on a trial farm near Narrandera in the New South Wales Riverina region.
The aim is to safely introduce new hazelnut species and develop a counter-seasonal supply during the Northern Hemisphere's winter, with good agricultural practices, economic and environmental sustainability and innovation.
But just a few months after this film was posted on YouTube, the company was gone and its hazelnut orchard was being ripped up and turned into wood chips. Ferrero's abrupt departure came with a 2-line statement saying that increasing adverse weather conditions meant the Riverina region's climate was not conducive to hazelnut farming, and that in the 10-year history of the pilot project, it had failed to achieve even a minimum level of acceptable yields.
It's going to be a good crop.
I think it's going to be, and they're going to be a good size as well. Aren't they?
Basil Baldwin worked as an agronomist before planting his own orchard. He has a PhD on hazelnuts and helped write the industry's grower manual. He reckons the Ferrero experiment was optimistic.
I thought they were very brave. I thought maybe if you did certain things, you might get it to work. Like shading the whole orchard, just for example, which would be very expensive. And obviously they were very keen to do something. But really it's a very hot, arid climate, and it's not an arid climate crop. It's a cool climate crop that comes from northwest Europe. So the chances of success were low. And if you look at world production areas, they all have similar sort of climates, and they're not arid like the Narrandera area.
And I think that's the challenge for the industry, not only in Australia but around the world, to look at whether we can develop varieties that will grow in warmer climates, because if we take climate change as an issue, then the regions will get warmer.
So, Trevor, you've got 10 hectares here. Is that fairly typical of the industry in Australia today?
I think very much so at this point in time.
Trevor Ranford from the Hazelnut Growers Association is putting a positive spin on Ferrero's failed investment. He says it's unlikely to impact the Australian industry.
Ferrero were about Ferrero and their nuts were for their production, and they're a confectionery business where the rest of the industry is very much about the fresh market.
Ferrero's farm is now on the market with a price tag of $80 million. It includes state-of-the-art infrastructure, drip irrigation and water entitlements worth more than $50 million.
It's got a great water licence, so I'd be very surprised if someone doesn't take up the opportunity.
Narrandera Shire Mayor Neville Kashenka reckons it's a premium investment opportunity.
We'd upgraded lots of roads in that area, also in the process of upgrading a bridge. But all those upgrades, I'm sure, would be appreciated by the landholders and any future development in that area.
There's another nut that could succeed where hazelnuts have not. Pistachio consumption in Australia has grown by 9% a year since 2000. And nurseries are struggling to keep up with demand for new orchards. At the Riverina Nut Company, sales for its Californian rootstock have grown by 1,000% in the last 6 years.
We'll probably stabilise one day, but there's been definitely a good growth over the last 6 years since we started our nursery. And there is strong demand also for the next couple of years at the moment.
Who's buying them?
It's a mix of corporate and private farmers that just convert into a more valuable crop like pistachio.
On this former canola farm near Robinvale on the western fringe of the Riverina, the ASX-listed Duxton Farms has planted more than 50,000 trees and has plans to double that this year. They're grafting buds onto Californian rootstock from trees developed by the CSIRO for Australian conditions. But it'll be many years before the company sees a return on its investment.
We will have limited production at 5 to 6 years and really no full production until 10, 11 years. So, but then you get good biannual production for 70 to 100 years. So it's a very long-term investment and a long-term crop.
The company is using old-style furrow or flood irrigation in its orchard. It believes this will save on energy and maintenance costs and create more resilient trees.
The pistachio is a very strong tree. They survive really well in dry, arid sort of conditions, and if you do turn the water off on a tree, it'll basically sit there dormant, and you can, fire it back up as soon as you apply the water again. So they're a very strong tree to work with.
Well, they're looking good.
Not bad. After all the rain we copped.
Generational wine grape growers Derek and Erica Menegon are expecting a bumper harvest this year, but prices are at record lows. They're converting part of their farm near Griffith to pistachios so that their children and grandchildren can better manage any future wine industry price volatility.
Well, we got all our eggs in one basket and they're starting to go off. So we've got to start changing. We've got to start. Yeah. Hopefully these here come in good and help us along a bit more for the kids, and yeah, who's going to be left behind with it? I don't know.
Australia is a net importer of pistachios, but with the new orchards being planted, the focus by 2030 will be on export markets.
We don't expect any particular problems with exports. China is a particularly good market for pistachios generally and for Australian nuts these days. India is also showing a lot of prospects, but Europe is a big consumer of pistachios and we would expect to be accepted quite well there.
So you had a shocker last year with La Nina. How's the harvest looking for this year?
Absolutely fantastic. This is going to be the best one of the best crops we've ever had. Almost.
Chris Joyce is a former nut merchant who started growing pistachios 40 years ago. He's a partner in a new $28 million processing plant, which will handle an estimated 12,000 tonnes by 2030.
The new processing plant is critical to the industry going forward because you only have a 3-week window to process the crop. So unless you've got that capacity to process it in 3 weeks, you're going to lose your crop because you can't process it in that very narrow window.
Chris Joyce is expanding his own pistachio plantings and is bullish about the industry. But he warns Australia is not the only country increasing production to meet growing world demand.
Where the Californian crop over a decade is going to more than triple, and the world supply is going to more than triple inside 10 years, that has the potential to have serious downward effects on prices, and managing and improving demand worldwide is going to be absolutely critical in the next 5 years.
For hazelnut producers like Basil and Jean Baldwin and their daughter Carolyn, just meeting domestic supply is still a challenge. The industry produces less than 10% of the Australian market.
The market's there. We never advertise because obviously our production is limited to our crop for the year. And sometimes we've only had 3 tonnes in a year and we've got to, you know, satisfy all our customers. So we don't promote ourselves, but people find us, and once they find us, they don't let us go.
The Hazelnut Growers Association believes research will be the key to encouraging small farmers to expand and build a sustainable industry.
We do have a lot of people who have come into the industry and put small hectares in, and you know, that's a second activity or a third activity for them. But as they become more comfortable with the crop, they will plant more trees and it will grow.
Despite the Ferrero setback, the association predicts plantings will triple over the next 5 years.
And I have some sad news about one of the Landline audience's favourite bushies. Sawmiller Ralph Affleck has died. He was 93. I visited the veteran timber cutter in 2014. Then, 84, Ralph had designed and built a sawmill he could operate alone. An engineering marvel, it was made from scavenged parts, like the brake from a century-old bullock wagon, bits from old steam engines, trucks, even AgForce bombers.
There are things in it that I didn't do right, because, let's face it, the fellow who's never made a mistake, he's never made anything.
It was an extraordinary achievement for a man who didn't finish school.
It's unbelievable that someone could sit down with a school ruler, mind you, a 30 centimetre wooden school ruler, and drew everything to scale in 3D.
But it wasn't without mishaps.
How many fingers have you got and how many toes?
I got 9 toes and I got 10 fingers. I chopped one off with a pinch bar one time, went straight through the top of my boot, my brand new boots. I thought, oh God, what a stupid thing to do now. I've ruined a pair of new boots.
With over 1 million views on YouTube, Ralph drew admiration and visitors from around the world.
I'm not to the stage of playing lawn bowls or something like that. I'm still making things, like I've just made a new clutch for this thing up here. I enjoy the challenge of making something that's going to work and having the pleasure of using it and saying, yeah, well, Ralph, you could have done better, but you didn't make a bad job of that.
Ralph passed away in Warwick on the Darling Downs in December last year. Vale Ralph. Coming up later in the show, a new take on tackling mental health in dairy farming.
Honestly, if the calendar creates one conversation that prevents a suicide, that's been a resounding success, but I reckon it's doing a whole lot more than that.
Hello, I'm Jane Norman. If you picked up a newspaper this week, you might have spotted a full-page ad railing against a planned carbon capture and storage project in the Great Artesian Basin. The trial project by Glencore Subsidiary Carbon Transport and Storage Corporation involves capturing and liquefying carbon from Queensland's Millmerran coal-fired power station and pumping it deep into the freshwater basin. AgForce is launching a legal challenge and an ad campaign appealing to the Queensland and federal governments to use their powers to halt the proposal. Carbon capture and storage has been hailed as one way fossil fuel companies can reduce emissions as Australia decarbonises its economy. But critics argue this project risks damaging a vital water source. For more, I was joined by AgForce Queensland Chief Executive Mike Guerin. Mike, why are you worried about this carbon capture and storage project?
In Australia, we have a great artesian basin, some 130,000 times the size of Sydney Harbour, that sits under 4 states, under about 30% of Australia's landmass, and provides water required for life itself in hundreds of regional communities, a large amount of industry, food production, provides great support to environmental outcomes, and has been put at risk because Glencore are weeks away from potentially getting final approval on the back of what has been a multi-year approvals process to pump over 330,000 tonnes of liquefied CO2 into that great artesian basin.
AgForce has been fighting this proposal for years now, and we are now potentially just weeks away from final approval. What are your options from here?
The Federal Minister has the power to revoke the decision made under the EPBC Act on the 9th of February 2022. We have provided the technical information to give her what she needs to make that revocation and to draw that back in for further consideration. That is the cleanest and easiest way to protect the great artesian basin.
Glencore says its project is based on robust scientific fieldwork, data and analysis, and involves injecting food-grade carbon dioxide deep underground. So according to Glencore, we're talking about soft drink levels of CO2 being pumped into the aquifer. What do you say to that?
We fundamentally disagree. We've done the technical work, we have the evidence. What they're proposing to do is to take the emissions from a coal-fired power station that is currently running up a chimney and into the atmosphere to liquefy it and put it underground. It is not clean emissions.
And just finally, from AgForce's perspective, are you opposed to carbon capture and storage technology, or are you opposed to it being used in this location?
This is a really, really important part of the conversation. AgForce and industry aren't opposed to carbon capture and storage. We understand it's a new and very good technology for allowing us to meet our broader climate goals around emissions and things that are important to humanity generally. Our concern is not with that technology. And indeed, in Australia and in Queensland, there are many, for example, old oil wells where you could pump the carbon back in and there would be no environmental impact.
Mike Guerin there. Glencore says its project has been reviewed by third-party experts, including the Australian Government's Independent Expert Scientific Committee, the Office of Groundwater Impact Assessment and the CSIRO. Well, over on the other side of the country, farmers are running out of water. It's been a scorching summer in Western Australia. Very high temperatures across the state are forcing some communities to cart water for both towns and livestock. To get a sense of what it's like on the ground, I spoke to WA South Coast merino farmer Dave Vandenberg. Dave, how's your season going so far?
Look, it's very dry. It's probably, if you look at some of the data, it's probably the driest we've ever been in the last 12 months for total rainfall. And there's probably areas north of us which are worse.
And what impact have these conditions had on your operation?
As we've run out of water in various places, we've had to move sheep. We carted water for a couple of months up at Salmon Gums, and then we totally destocked that property and then moved them further south. And we also put a third of our sheep out on adjustment, which is not easy to find.
And I understand you've had a bit of trouble actually selling off stock?
Well, there was been a huge backlog trying to get into processes, and with the federal government pressure on live export, that's been almost a non-event. So we've had very little animals be able to go on live export. We're still carrying last year's bit of cast for aged mutton, because we weren't able to get them in. We weren't able to sell them last year, so we've still got them now. So, you know, we're probably, I guess we're overstocked, but yeah, we just can't sell them. That's half the battle.
Well, all eyes are on this ex-tropical cyclone Lincoln. Is this your best hope at this stage of a reprieve?
Look, every day is closer to rain. We sort of would consistently get a big summer rain at least every second year, if not every year. It's been 5 years since we've had a summer rain of note, apart from, you know, scattered thunderstorms or something. But so law of averages should say it'd have to rain, and this system looks as good as any. I know they're pretty hard to predict, but I think the bomb website is going to get searched a fair few times, particularly from this area.
Dave, we're all hoping this system does bring some much-needed relief for WA. Thanks for your time.
All right, thank you.
And that's Landline News.
Sally Jones is a dairy farmer's daughter. Her dad took his life 7 years ago. To honour him and help other dairying families deal with mental illness, Sally not only resurrected her dad's old milk factory with a friend, she's launched a calendar sharing the lives and challenges of Gippsland's dairy farmers. And a warning, this story mentions suicide. For 50 years, this dairy was where Sally Jones's dad, Michael Bowen, milked his beloved jerseys and created pioneering businesses. In the mid-80s, he built a factory to bottle Jersey milk and make ice cream. Nearing 60, and with his 3 daughters away pursuing their careers, he sold the cows, leased the land and shut the dairy.
And that was the start of a 3-year journey for us as a family, with him battling depression and psychosis. So he was no longer a dairy farmer, he was no longer a manufacturer or businessman. His identity had gone.
Mr. Bowen suicided in 2016.
He was in so much pain that he thought he was doing us a favour for not being around.
Devondale Murray Goulburn slashed the price it pays milk producers who are already struggling with unseasonably dry conditions.
Around the same time, Murray Goulburn informed shocked dairy farmers they'd been overpaid and owed the company tens of thousands of dollars. While Sally's family wasn't affected, her friend Steve Ronalds was. He'd been weighing up his future in dairy before the crisis. But then Murray Goulburn told him he owed $80,000.
The fear in the industry was just horrible. So I guess it's that pressure and that tension from all these different angles coming through. That was probably the tipping point.
Steve wanted independence from big processors and suggested to Sally a way to honour her dad would be if they started a dairy business. And Gippsland Jersey was born.
When he died, I think I just needed to put that grief and whatever into creating something positive.
It was daunting and probably exciting and just a bit of desperation. Well, here's the last hurrah. Let's give it our best shot.
Steve's 400 jerseys provided the milk for the first bottling run. Disillusioned with big milk, they set 3 core values for their business.
One is that farmers have to be paid a fair price because the dairy crisis was going on right then and there. And I also knew that, you know, Dad always had a voice for farmers. The second one is around creating social change in rural mental health. And that pillar is personal for me because I believe that, you know, we are losing people in rural communities. And if we can have a little bit of, play a little role in creating some change, then that's great. And the third one is kindness.
Steve says it's about more than making money.
That's not what drives us. Within us, there's something deeper in there that just we just want to make a difference. And yep, we can't make a difference unless we're profitable.
The first farmers who signed on were paid a 25 to 30% premium for their milk. Gippsland Dairy still pays more for milk than the big processors.
I think most other companies would do market research and say, well, this is what we think the consumer will pay. This is going to cost all this. Oh, this is what's left for the farmer. Not cool at all. So, you know, we don't think that's an acceptable way to do business.
The old factory belonging to Sally's dad was renovated through crowdfunding and donated labour. Now, 50,000 litres from 4 suppliers is bottled, turned into butter, buttermilk and creme fraiche every week.
We've had 70% year-on-year growth up until last year. The growth has slowed down, but we're consolidating. And Brink, Coles and Woolies, I'm really proud and I'm really thankful to the people that choose to buy our milk because they're choosing to support something greater than just the milk.
And that is to move the dial on mental health, especially within the farming community.
Because it was only about 6 months after Dad died and I had a moment in the shower where I thought, it's about storytelling.
In 2017, Sally used her storytelling and marketing skills to produce a calendar profiling 12 farmers.
The first calendar we did was pretty raw. All the stories were pretty intense and probably most of them had the word suicide in them. Yeah, I don't think all did, but most did. And that was a word that wasn't really used, you know, I think 7 years ago.
I know that these are the stories and the people that my dad would have loved to have known and to have read about. And yeah, every time I meet them, in the back of my mind, I think, yeah, Dad would get along well with you. He would have loved to have come out to your farm.
Now, is this where the world gets to meet Joe?
Yes.
Here's Joe. This is the first.
Mr. September in that first calendar was Joe Migetto. He'd been dogged by depression for years.
There was a lot of crying, there was a lot of hair pulling, and there's a lot of soul searching inside a tractor by yourself, wondering, you know, how am I going to get out of all this? So it was tough times. There's a lot of negative thoughts, that's for sure.
Too embarrassed to see his doctor and worried what his mates would think, Joe kept it to himself for 10 years until in 1995 his brother asked what was wrong.
And I just pulled out this bullet and said, I'm going to use this on me one day. And then we spoke a bit more and then we parted, and then within 20 minutes I had the cows at the shed and the police turned up at the milking shed.
Joe has since got the help he needed, and when Sally called to ask him to be in a calendar, his only worry was it was a nude calendar.
Was it a relief to pick up the calendar and go, I said it out loud, friends, family, everyone knows?
Yeah, it was. It was like a big burden off your shoulders. You think, people know now.
Sally's just launched the 6th calendar, and helping out was Joe.
You know, 7 years ago, we hardly spoke about mental health. So I was embarrassed. I don't want my mates to know that I'm suffering. I want to commit suicide.
Joe happily takes calls from troubled farmers and says talking publicly helps.
But bloody hell, right here today, you think, you don't know who's suffering. But I really hope one day that bloody you struggle to find 12 people, because we're all on the bloody path of, you know, recovery, and we're all, you know, a lot better. But
And we've now covered off 72 stories, which I think is nearly 10% of Gippsland's dairy farms. It's been an amazing journey, and I think for me to be here, back in the factory that Dad built, it's full circle. And yeah, he'd be so proud.
Sally takes a film crew to every farm to produce videos of the participants. Many are often opening up for the first time. The videos go on the business's website.
He didn't know what was wrong. Like, I kept asking him what's wrong, and he goes, I don't know. I don't know why I'm like this. I don't know.
Probably the way I've probably coped is by talking to people that I know have probably experienced the same or similar thing. Like,
I'm going to cry.
Hopefully they can get onto it a lot quicker and get them help and stuff like that. So hopefully good things will come out of it.
So this was all underwater, right through those sheds. During and after the flood in 2007, I was just completely physically and emotionally exhausted. I was in a place where I didn't know how to cope.
It's our connectedness and our ability to be held by our community and to really deeply belong in our community that makes us resilient in floods and fires and droughts. And this work helps us feel more deeply connected in a really emotional way. Like, it's pretty raw today, and it's pretty raw to stand up and say, yep, I've had, you know, troubles with wanting to stay here. And yeah, so I think Sally's, what she's doing is a gift. The bulk of the calendar funding comes from Gippsland Lakes Complete Health. It's proved a timely and effective investment.
This community has reeled from drought to fire to flood. We've had landslip, earthquake, just the pressure of living on the land and trying to make your living from farming is relentless. They're an incredibly resilient, but at the same time, exhausted, I think, community. Honestly, if the calendar creates one conversation that prevents a suicide, that's been a resounding success, but I reckon it's doing a whole lot more than that, hundreds of conversations.
Sally has a knack for convincing farmers presumed to be unlikely to have mental health issues to talk. The tough nuts, the jokers, the outwardly happy, and the intensely private. That local football captain Royston Doc Nettleton had issues with the black dog shocked many in his community. Sally says Doc and others' openness has changed lives and in some cases saved them.
I think the hardest thing is just saying yes for a start, and that's the same as when you try to seek help. I think, especially for myself, the hardest thing was booking the appointment.
The calendar's a clever way to reach farmers, as they have a long life, hanging in kitchens, offices and dairies all year. And there's a list of support services on the back page. Doc reckons, sadly, the need for a calendar isn't going away.
It seems to be getting worse. I don't know why, but just the pressures of life, I suppose, and the old mind's a funny thing.
Mental health is so tricky. I'm not saying it's easy. The world is going at such a crazy pace, and it's all of our responsibility to look after each other.
Bit of a surprise that she does keep finding them, but she works hard at it and is passionate about it, and which is great to see. And obviously, you've only got to save one person's life, and you know,
she's done a job.
If this story has raised issues for you or someone you know, you can call Lifeline on 13 11 14 anytime.
G'day, I'm Matt Brand. Farmers in Australia's largest wine-producing region held a crisis meeting this week amid historically low prices for their grapes. Growers in South Australia's Riverland say prices now are the same as what they were getting in the 1970s, with many of them considering pushing down vines or leaving the industry altogether.
We're being offered to be screwed slowly. That's what we're being offered. I need $400 a tonne to break even. They've offered us $150 a tonne. So I made the decision, and the lack of information, to spray my grapes with Epithon and to not have a crop this year because they wouldn't guarantee to pay me.
So what is going wrong? I spoke to Lee McLean from Australian Grape and Wine.
Yeah, well, it's certainly a really difficult time for grape growers and winemakers in many parts of the country. As you said, I was in the Riverland a couple of days ago for that town hall meeting in Barmera, and that was really indicative of how challenging it is for a lot of growers and winemakers. We've had some really significant challenges over the last few years, not the least of which was the effective closure of the China market due to those import duties being imposed on us. To put that in context, that was by far and away our largest export market, valued at about $1.2 billion per year. Today, we're exporting less than $10 million worth of wine to that market. So that's an enormous shock to the system and something we're working through. But in addition to that, we've also had really quite severe cost of living and inflationary pressures in a lot of our other export markets. So traditional markets like the US and the UK have seen a downturn in recent years in terms of the volumes and the value of exports as well.
So Lee, if or when China reduces its tariffs on Aussie wine, will that save the day?
Look, I think the first thing to note is that the Australian government and the Chinese government have reached this agreement to review those import duties. So China is going through the process of doing that now. The due date there is the 31st of March. So we will have a decision one way or another by that date, we hope. We certainly hope that it's going to be a positive decision. Now, to answer your question, if those import duties are removed, and we hope they are, it's still not going to be a silver bullet for solving all of these problems. The market in China's changed fairly significantly over recent years. People are buying a little bit less wine. They're still buying at relatively high price points, but those volumes are reduced, and the world is in oversupply, particularly for red wine at the moment.
And can we talk about this week's Four Corners program on the tactics used by supermarkets? I wanted to ask, how is the industry feeling about supermarkets selling home brand wine that's labelled with stories about the Barossa Valley, but made in Victoria with perhaps no grapes from the Barossa region at all?
Well, I think consumers want and deserve to have clarity about what they're purchasing. In our industry, we actually have a legislated program called the Label Integrity Program, which is really meant to look at where grapes are coming from, the vintage they're coming from, and what the variety is itself. So we have some safeguards in there already, and from a government perspective. Where there may be some other areas of concern is where some of those stories about perhaps particular sites in that region are mentioned, and I think that's what you're referring to with the Four Corners story the other night. That may not quite fall into that basket of the Label Integrity Program, but I think consumers should have a good understanding of where that wine is coming from and what they're purchasing.
That's Lee McLean from Australian Grape and Wine. Let's go to Chicago now, where global corn prices continue to slide. The last time corn was below the $4 mark was in late 2020. Reuters is reporting the US has record corn supplies sitting in silos, and US farmers are kicking themselves for not selling last year. International values are dragging down most of our domestic grain prices. I'm told Aussie growers are reluctant to sell at the moment and buyers are cautious. In New York, it was a pretty steady week for both cotton and sugar futures, The future of the Mossman Sugar Mill in Queensland is looking bleak, with a decision looming in the next few days on whether that mill will be shut down or not. In the sale yards this week, cattle numbers fell and prices sort of tracked sideways. Abattoirs are going hard, processing over 125,000 head in a week, which is up 17% on this time last year. And JBS Australia's huge Dinmore abattoir near Ipswich, well, it's now doing a double shift, which has seen that company employ an extra 300 people. On the topic of abattoirs, ABS data this week confirmed that Australia produced a record amount of lamb last year. As MLA points out, despite concerns that abattoirs would struggle to handle the extra numbers and find enough staff, these figures show that the processors found a way. The number of sheep yarded this week halved and the mutton price lifted, but overall the sheep and lamb market remains volatile. Not much movement in wool prices, but with the Lunar New Year holidays now over, Chinese factories are getting back to work, which will hopefully improve demand. And finally, Australia's live export trade to Indonesia is back on track after Indonesia finally issued import permits for 2024. I'm aware of 2 ships that have already sailed out of Darwin Port, and 2 ships have also left Fremantle. And because Ramadan and Lebaran are fast approaching, I'm told there is strong demand for heavier, ready-to-eat cattle. And that is the Landline check on prices. Keep it rural.
Next week on Landline, one of the most resilient farmers you're ever likely to meet.
Doctors were not keen for me to live too far from hospital, but I never considered the option of living in the city. I was going back to the farm, right or wrong.
A fussy little bird facing extinction is getting help from farmers in the Western Riverina. It's estimated there are less than 1,000 plains wanderers left in the wild. Riverina reporter Cara Jeffrey visited the Hay Plains, where most of the remaining population lives, to see the conservation work going on there.
The search is on for the elusive plains wanderer. If there's anyone who can track it down, it's bird expert and biologist David Parker.
So plains wanderers are really cryptic. They use their camouflage really well to hide during the day, and even when walking through a paddock, they're not a species that's reluctant or that would flush like a quail. So what they'll often do is just move out of your way and often unknown to you with their movement. At night, we're basically seeing the birds when they're resting or when they're at their least active. And by being that and being in a time where there's no predators flying about above them, they're readily happily to sit still and be seen.
Tonight, David Parker is searching the paddocks of the McCulloch family's sheep and cattle station, Bullawa, on the Hay Plains in the Western Riverina. With some paddocks more than 1,000 hectares in size, finding a ground-dwelling brown bird about 15 centimetres tall takes skill and time. Due to favourable seasonal conditions for breeding, David is confident of finding a pair of plains wanderers.
A few different birds jumping around out there that have been catching my eye, Dave, but not the plains wanderer, you don't think?
No, so far we've seen stubble quail and pipits. So there's no eye shine. You're not looking for eye shine like you would with say an owl or something like that. So you're looking for a bit of movement. There he is. So just go quietly and slowly. So that's a adult male plains wanderer. So you can see with him, he's pretty much a fawn coloured bird all round, bit of scalloping on his wings, and then the yellow legs and that bill are unlike anything else.
How do the male and female find each other?
So the female does most of the calling. She's got quite a loud, solid call. She uses both to mark her territory, but also to attract the males.
Plural, yes, you heard that right. Males is what the female plains wanderer is seeking.
The female is the one that holds the territory. She'll have around 12 hectares of grassland that she'll call home, and she'll share that with a number of males. So it could be 2 or 3 or more males. With the first male, she might mate, lay the eggs, and then he'll take over the incubation role. She might assist to a small amount, but as soon as the eggs are hatched, she leaves and leaves the male to look after all of the young until they're independent.
By day, it becomes clear why it's so hard to spot the plains wanderer. It's very fussy when it comes to habitat, which has earned it the name of the Goldilocks bird. The grasslands can't be too dense or too sparse if it's going to hang around and cohabitate. Conditions have to be just right.
The scientific name of the plains wanderer is Pedionomus torquatus, and it's in the evolutionary line of things, it's one of the most distinct species that we have in the world, let alone just Australia. So the Goldilocks term has been penned for the bird because of the habits that it has. So it just doesn't occupy any grassland out in these areas. It has really specific parts of the structure that it likes. So it has to be 50% or around 50% bare ground, 40% grass, and the rest is made up typically of litter. They really like that key sweet spot, hence the Goldilocks term, for it to sit in that area.
Yeah, you've got to be careful on that bend on the Willowra Road. There's always cattle in there.
Achieving that delicate balance for the bird is where landholders' grazing management comes in. Farmers are working with the New South Wales Biodiversity Conservation Trust, also known as BCT, to manage their paddocks to encourage the endangered bird to survive and thrive on their properties.
7 farming families in the Western Riverina have set aside more than 15,000 hectares of their land to help protect the habitat of the plains wanderer.
And that's just the landholders working with the BCT. There are other conservation groups also working with farmers to bring the plains wanderer back from the brink of extinction. Rhys McCulloch and his family are helping to manage the bird's habitat.
Yeah, so a classic would be something like this here. Yep. Which is where, they could make a nest in there. So you've got that nice big tall tussock that gives them a bit of protection, a bit of shelter. Yep. On McCulloch's place, there's probably a couple hundred hectares of habitat that's suitable for the bird. And over a period of time, there could be up to 20 pairs or so here.
To ensure farmers are managing their paddocks just right for the Goldilocks bird, landholders have committed to conservation agreements of at least 15 years with the BCT. It also benefits their grazing management.
The 40 to 60% of the ground cover is perfect because it allows the plant to replenish after we graze it down to 40%. And then when it gets to 60, obviously you stop that plant from reaching an oxidising phase, which then is wasted for us. So, yeah, if the plains wanderer enjoys that, then so do we.
The paddock where the plains wanderers were spotted at night on the McCulloch's property is one of those being managed for the bird.
We've given that probably about 120 days rest from sheep. It did have cattle in it, which was a very light amount of cattle. And they predominantly were eating down a long way away from the plains wanderer primary habitat. So, yeah, we've got a mission to fence that area off.
Following a tender process, the Biodiversity Conservation Trust provides funding to farmers up to $40 a hectare to maintain that perfect ground cover for the plains wanderer's habitat.
The financial part of the Plains Wanderer program has been perfect for us because we've actually installed drought lots or containment pens, which we can now give the country more rest and manage our stock better.
Fencing is a huge undertaking for the McCullochs, as the average size of their paddocks was more than 1,500 hectares. Reducing their paddock size is one of the main ways they are managing their ground cover for the benefit of their commercial grazing operation and the plains wanderer.
This program has increased our profit just by managing our pastures. We did manage before, but the plains wanderer habitat has made it more of a conscious effort to manage the pastures more critically, which we see our sheep have a constant condition score, They're producing probably another 250 to 300 grams of wool per head, just by having feed in front of them and having it in that perfect phase of high production feeds.
So how's it been going, Tom? It's been 6 months since I was out here.
Yeah, good. I think we're looking after the paddocks and we're looking forward to out here. We've got a fencing program to put in.
Yeah.
We're getting in that underway.
Tom Hook and his family run 15,000 breeding ewes on their large-scale merino operation near Wanganella in the Riverina. On the day we visit, they've just started shearing their flock of 30,000 sheep and lambs.
Naturally, we want to be part of something that helps an endangered animal, but also they really put it to us about how we can tie it in with the things we already want to do. We want to be able to manage our landscape, to have a healthy landscape, to run a good business, and we just thought it really tied into what our core principles are anyway, so it was an easy decision.
As part of their agreement, noxious weed control is a priority. So far, they have removed more than 4,000 boxthorn shrubs.
So it's all about promoting biodiversity and improved grazing management practices, which, as I said, it's already what we want to do. It's the best thing for our business. A lot of it comes into cutting paddocks up. We've developed a containment area, so whatever we can do to maintain ground cover and manage our animals better across the landscape.
The Hooks have divided 2,000 hectare paddocks into 800 hectares and are working towards improving their grazing management. Tom also recognises the Goldilocks bird needs things just right to prosper.
For the bird, there absolutely is a sweet spot. We don't want 100% ground cover. We don't want, too little. So there is a sweet spot. If we get to a point where the ground cover's too thick, we'll actively graze that to manage it, to keep that in that perfect habitat for the bird.
Cassie Douglas is part of the Biodiversity Conservation Trust team that determines the suitability of the land and the conservation work landholders can do while running their farm business.
Part of that negotiation project between the BCT and landholders, we talk about whether or not we need to do paddock subdivisions, so some fencing, or whether we need to upgrade fencing to maintain stock proofness so that stock can't get into paddocks when they're not supposed to be in there. They might be doing boxthorn or Bathurst burr control, part of landscape fox baiting programs. That's a condition of these agreements that they participate in landscape scale baiting because it's so important for the species to thrive. And also maybe some rabbit control and those sorts of activities as part of their agreement.
The Hook family have a 20-year agreement to help ensure the future of the critically endangered plains wanderer, while still producing high-quality merino wool.
Everyone's well aware that we're custodians of big tracts of land and often multi-generational land, and so I think it just goes hand in hand. There's kind of just an unspoken obligation to do what you can in these kind of spaces.
No wonder it's called the Goldilocks bird. Things have to be just right for it to survive, and now hopefully it will. And that's the show for today, but don't forget we're on iView if you've missed any of our previous programs. I'll leave you with the weekly weather update from the Bureau. From all the team, bye for now.
G'day from the Bureau. Here's a look at the week's weather from Sunday the 25th of February. Let's begin in Western Australia, where ex-tropical cyclone Lincoln is moving southeast through the state, bringing rain and some strong wind. The rain may be welcome in some areas after a very hot and very dry summer, but by itself, it's not likely to be enough to set up for winter cropping in most places. Elsewhere, heavy rain and possible storms for the central coast down to the Wide Bay coast in Queensland, showers across the tropical north, but a mostly dry and settled day for the rest. A big high pressure system sets up in the Great Australian Bight on Monday. Some showers are possible about both the southwest and southeast of the country, but only light rainfall totals expected. Storms could bring more heavy rain to parts of North Queensland, especially about the peninsula. Away from wet season conditions in northern Australia, very little rain is expected around the country on Tuesday and Wednesday. However, temperatures will begin to climb once again in most southern areas. Wednesday in particular looks to be a hot day for South Australia, Victoria, Tasmania, New South Wales and ACT, with high 30s and possible low 40s for many. It will also be a spike day for fire danger across the southeast as winds strengthen, about a low in the south. Thursday sees rain at the top and bottom of the country without much in between. Tropical showers and storms extend into central Northern Territory and western Queensland. Meanwhile, this low pressure area in the south brings rain and gusty winds to Tasmania. Elsewhere, dry with above average temperatures for many once again. The week ends with another influx of moisture into Western Australia. Showers and possible storms for many, although perhaps not reaching the far west coast, including Perth. Showers and storms look possible for much of the country's interior, although the eastern states look to be running rather dry. And that's all for this week. We'll see you again next Sunday.